Hitchcock, CMC, and 2 related small hospitals, is seriously impinged. That agreement is roughly 100 pages long. I've been reading contracts in my career for 45 years. I've rarely seen one so difficult to dissect. Whether that is done intentionally or just by the lawyer's skills of being verbose, I don't know. But I can tell you this, it is very difficult, but dramatic. It's difficult to find the impingements, the substantial impingements on the mission of CMC and Granite One. But they are there in that agreement. They certainly are not clearly articulated in the initial letter of intent. Commonly in legal circles, the letter of intent is written as a non-binding, simple statement of what the parties intend to do. It is not a binding legal document. But this combination agreement, if we can call it that, let's call it the final agreement, is the only contractual obligation set forth. So we're here today to discuss with you, by people much more in the know than I am, as to those impingements, the frightening consequences of the ability of CMC to continue its mission, as stated for so many years, a pro-life mission, articulated well. We're here to discuss the risks to that mission with you today. We have several people, as I just mentioned, that are extremely knowledgeable. They will introduce themselves as we go. The first to speak will be, by way of introduction, Jason Hennessy. Jason Hennessy is our president of New Hampshire Right to Life. So he will introduce this topic. We'll spend perhaps 45 minutes to an hour talking to you about the topic, and then we'll turn the forum over to the group here for any questions or comments you may have. Thank you again for being here. It's important that you know what we are going to say today, and you can judge it then for yourself. Thank you for being here. Jason?
So welcome. I'm so glad you guys braved the weather to come out and join us tonight. This is great. I really appreciate the concern for keeping a pro-life hospital here in Manchester. And that's really what this is about, is we want to keep a pro-life hospital. If we don't fight for this now, we may wake up in a couple of years and find that we don't have one anymore. So tonight, we're actually going to hear a story about that from Colleen, who worked in Vermont and actually witnessed this happen, a takeover by a secular entity of a Catholic hospital that then lost its ways as the years went by. We want to keep CMC, we want CMC to thrive, we want to keep it healthy and happy. We don't believe that this takeover, and I say takeover intentionally because if you read the agreement, Dartmouth controls the system board, which then controls the budgets, the strategic plans, and many other aspects of running a hospital. So this is not a combination, in our opinion. This is a takeover. You'll even find that if you read farther down in the combination agreement, the initial trustees that CMC gets to have, they go away, and the board self-appoints. And so if the majority of the board is Dartmouth, who do you think they're going to appoint? Are they going to appoint the noisy people who are making a lot of commotion about these pro-life things, or are they going to appoint people who are more in line with their own ideology? So I want you to be thinking about these things. So the two biggest things that we want to talk about tonight are, first, the charitable mission of Catholic Medical Center. We believe that because Dartmouth controls so many aspects of this united entity, that CMC will no longer be free to actually execute their entity. All of the protections they have in place for not doing certain procedures are negatives. The bishop and the diocese are allowed to object to things. But that is not how you accomplish a mission. You do not accomplish a mission by saying no to things. You accomplish a mission by saying yes to things. that are in your mission. And so CMC will be hamstrung when it comes to its strategic plans, when it comes to its budgets, that all have to be approved by the Dartmouth-controlled board. And so we want to keep the mission, which includes respect for the unborn. We want CMC to keep that and keep it well. And so that's the big one, the first part. The second part is that this is actually, if we look at the experiences of other places around the country, healthcare prices almost always go up, and not just by a little. So if you pay taxes, remember, a big part of your taxes goes towards personnel. And at least in my town, usually when the budget goes up by a lot, they say it's over inflation. They say it's because of healthcare. So if you're concerned about healthcare prices, if you pay for healthcare, if you ever go to the doctors, this is something you need to pay attention to. And there's also evidence that when you have large combinations like this, quality can go down. So, and this is all because there's a lack of competition. So you're going to hear from these wonderful speakers who are very engaged tonight. So we have attorney Phil Gray. So Phil Gray is the president of St. Joseph's Foundation, and he's a canon lawyer. And he's one of the few full-time operating canon lawyers in the country that do not work directly for a diocese. So he was here 10 years ago, and he paid a lot of attention. He's done a lot of reading, and he's going to share some of his insight with us. Colleen Akey is a nurse anesthetist. Did I say that right? A nurse anesthetist, so she's a medical practitioner, and she's also a bioethicist, and she has a lot of experience to share with us about what she has seen. And then we have Barbara Hagan, is a former state representative and also a part of New Hampshire Right to Life, I believe a president for some number of years.
30 years.
Yeah, so for a long time. And she has been very involved in the last 10 years ago with fighting the CMC Dartmouth combination then, and then 20 years ago with Optima. And Kathy Hagan has also...
No, Susan.
Yeah, I'm sorry. They kind of come as a pair sometimes. So Kathy Souza is also a former state representative, a former member of New Hampshire Right to Life, and has also been very involved through the last two merger attempts, through Optima 20 years ago and through the Dartmouth CMC combination 10 years ago.
Right.
And so I'm really looking forward to hearing your questions. Thank you everybody at home who's tuning in. We're really glad that you could join us despite the weather. So hopefully the weather at your house is much better. So now, Attorney Phil Gray.
Thank you. What I'd like to do to introduce the issue is just address 4 major issues as I see them in this CMC Dartmouth Hitchcock merger. These 4 specifically are the nature of a social contract, transparency, the necessity of a process to evaluate this change in the contract, and Catholic identity. And these issues are interrelated, and in my opinion, all of the other issues and concerns fall under one or another of these 4. So please consider this brief introduction. The nature of a social contract between a charity and the public beneficiaries. This applies both to Catholic Medical Center and to Dartmouth Hitchcock, and as explained by the Attorney General in his March 10, 1998 report on the Optima merger, quote, "Traditionally, a trust is defined as a fiduciary relationship in which one person or entity manages property for the benefit of another person or entity, known as the beneficiary. Generally speaking, a charitable trust is a trust intended to benefit the community at large or some specified portion of that community. A charitable trust creates a social contract between the charity and the public beneficiaries. Courts have held that the assets of a charitable corporation are impressed with a charitable trust that restricts the use of the assets to the defined purposes of the corporation. Profits, and he has that in quotations, of a charitable corporation must be applied in strict conformity with the stated charitable objects and purposes, close quote. Basically what he's saying is that in a charitable trust, the purpose of the entity, in this case it would be Catholic Medical Center and also Dartmouth Hitchcock, because it's also a charitable trust, have an obligation to pursue their mission in conformity and their activities in conformity with how their patrons and donors see them in that mission. That's very critical, because that's what sets up the trust. That's what sets up the trust. For both CMC and Dartmouth Hitchcock, there are three critical areas that must be examined in relation to the mission of each. Regarding the mission of Catholic Medical Center, number one, its identity as a public juridic person operating in the name of the Catholic Church. Number two, its obligation to uphold Catholic doctrine and morals. And number three, that it is subject to the Vatican, not just the Bishop of Manchester and secular authorities. Regarding the mission of Dartmouth Hitchcock, the three issues are its identity as a secular non-sectarian charity, its obligation to provide services considered immoral by the Catholic Church, but they do have this obligation to provide these services. And three, subject to secular authorities only. They only are subject to secular authorities, not to the church. There is strong precedence demonstrating that two charitable trusts with opposing ideologies cannot be merged or affiliated without harm to the social contracts that motivate and sustain the charities involved. This was clearly identified both in the Optima attempt and the 2010 attempt. The second issue, transparency. Because a charitable trust operates within a social contract with its donors and patrons, it is crucial that full and proper transparency with donors and patrons guide its operations. Without that transparency, the necessary trust that underpins the relationship of that social contract is destroyed. The 1998 Optima merger and the 2010, I'm sorry, I kind of got into my Boston accent there. The 1998 Optima merger and the 2010 attempted CMC DHH merger was plagued with transparency issues. That plague seems to be continuing to this day. There are 4 points to that. Number one, the opinion of the CMC canon lawyer is considered confidential by the CMC board. This disallows a full and frank public discussion with patrons and donors on the board of directors' understanding of Catholic identity and its intentions to protect it. Now, we know what many of its patrons and donors believe. What does the board of directors believe? Number two, the full opinion on the moral and ethical obligations of CMC has not been published. This also disallows a full and frank discussion on the moral and ethical issues. Number three, in the previous merger attempts, these same presentations were held confidential, even after repeated attempts to obtain them and discuss about them. Actually, in the 2010 merger, it devolved into an ad hominem attack on those of us trying to discuss those issues. Number four, a reasonable person would ask, why is CMC afraid to present the canon law and theological evaluations it received on the matter? There is widespread perception in today's culture that when church authorities use secrecy to hide the nature of their dealings from the public, that bad things are happening. That same secrecy is taking place with the CMC DHH merger, and people should be wondering why. What do they have to hide? Third point, the necessary process or a perfunctory process. During the 2009-2010 review of the potential merger, material evidence was provided to the state of New Hampshire demonstrating that DHH and CMC had already engaged in a variety of activities that should have resulted from the legal merger or affiliation. In other words, there was a false start. That process of integration and affiliation without oversight by the Attorney General began around 2005. After the failed merger attempt in 2010, there is no evidence to show that those activities subsided appropriately. despite an investigation by the Attorney General into potential violations of fiduciary duty by the then president and CEO of CMC. There is a strong appearance that violations of the social contract held between CMC and its donors and patrons was violated in the past and is being violated now in this current process. If this is true, this process would merely have the appearance of being an attempt to use a legal process to justify moral and legal violations of that social contract. The lack of transparency raises significant alarm bells that should be heard. Number 4, Catholic identity. An underlying issue related to all of these issues is the unique identity of CMC as a Catholic hospital. Now, this identity is compounded by its nature as a public juridic person with all the obligations and rights associated with that status. Now, it's important to remember that during the Optima merger, CMC did not have this public juridic status within the church, and still its Catholic identity was recognized by the Attorney General and the merger was undone. Neither the Catholic identity nor its public juridic status should be summarily dismissed as unimportant or unaffected by this process. On the contrary, this process must examine in an honest and open manner the complexity of these issues. In fact, because of the practical reality associated with Catholic identity, Planned Parenthood and New Hampshire Right to Life made a joint statement against the 2010 merger attempt. These realities have not changed. Entities with opposing views on life issues understood this in 2010. The Attorney General understood it in 1998 and in 2010. The ideologies of the two hospital systems cannot be reconciled without harm to the social contract that each hospital has with its donors and patrons. It would be kind of like Donald Trump being elected as the chair of the the Democratic National Committee. So with that, I turn it over to Barbara.
Thank you very much for coming. This month has a lot of really nice feast days, and one of the feast days that's coming up is the feast day of Bernadette Subaru from Our Lady of Lourdes. And I think it is significant that we are having this discussion at this time. Many of you will remember Teresa Chabot and Karen Poza, and also Teresa DeZillo, Sue Hamill, and others who prayed in all kinds of weather with different groups would come to Catholic Medical Center praying to Our Lady. The hospital was initially Notre Dame Hospital. And I want to just talk a little bit about the significance of the identity, again, of where Catholic Medical Center came from, because it helps us to boil down some of the issues that Attorney Gray just spoke about, and it also points to why it is imperative that we hold their feet to the fire and keep Catholic Medical Center Catholic and separate, because its mission, as Father Heavey saw it, was to offer care to those who needed it, those who were sick. But it also was a means to evangelize our Catholic faith. And the great Pope John Paul II many, many times told the crowds that he visited in the United States, we must stand up. We must stand up and say this is human life. We must protect it. We're not called to just keep our faith within some four walls of a building. We are to go out and evangelize this and proclaim it, because the healing mission of Christ was through all of the places that he traveled while he spoke to many crowds and healed those who were sick. He was evangelizing. So I just briefly want to refer to a document that we have which came out of Optima. And there's not too many copies of this document around, but we have it, and we have given it to New Hampshire Right to Life, and they are going to post it on their website. After Optima, the Attorney General made the two boards go back to the drawing table and to say, you need to figure this out, or you need to go your separate ways. So Catholic Medical Center did have a special CMC board. The bishop appointed the members. And one of the first things they looked at was how Catholic Medical Center came about. And the events that led up to the formation of Catholic Medical Center in 1974, well, they started with Sacred Heart Hospital, which was the first Catholic hospital in New Hampshire and was established in 1892 by Mother Mary Gonzaga of the Sisters of Mercy with the assistance of Bishop Bradley, who was the ordinary for the Diocese of Manchester at that time. The hospital was a nonprofit volunteer institution sponsored by the Sisters of Mercy. It contained 30 beds, and in the first year it treated 123 patients. And when Bishop Bradley was asked what the admission requirements were for the hospital, he said, "None, except, of course, to be sick. The hospital makes no distinction of color, race, or creed." The first medical staff of Sacred Heart Hospital was organized in January of 1894, and Sacred Heart Hospital gave its first report around that time, and the quote was, "The Sacred Heart Hospital, in which we feel a just prize, is, in a truest sense, a general hospital open to all, irrespective of color, creed, or nationality. While payment is expected from those who are capable of making it, no one is turned away." So with the establishment of Sacred Heart Hospital, Monsignor Pierre Hevy took a trip to Lourdes. And he was profoundly changed by that trip. And he came back, and he wanted to dedicate a hospital to Our Lady of Lourdes on the property which was part of the parish at that time of St. Mary's Parish on the west side of Manchester. It was with, so he came back, and it was formed on the west side of Manchester in 1893 by the Sisters of Charity from the province of Quebec, who we fondly remember as the Grey Nuns. And it was done at the request of Monsignor Pierre Hevy. And the establishment of Notre Dame Hospital followed also with the founding of an orphanage, home for chronically ill elderly women by the Sisters of Charity in 1888. In order to supplement the hospital's patient income, the Ladies of Charity, a forerunner of the Notre Dame Associates, sold bread and other home-cooked food, and in addition, the hospital provided certain hospital facilities for uses such as showers and vapor baths for a small fee. The efforts of the Ladies of Charity led to the opening of a 3-story addition containing 30 beds, which was added to Notre Dame Hospital in 1894. Original hospital incorporation charter provided for the establishment of a school of nursing, which opened in July of 1911 with 7 students. And in 1912, Notre Dame's hospital capacity was increased to 55 beds. So you see in the history of what unfolded thus far, how the people in the community who would buy the bread, have the baby shower, these are their contributions. They would see the sisters. Here, sister, here's a small donation for somebody who can't afford to, pay their bill or whatever. Here's, so that the charity came from the hearts and the good nature of the people who lived on the west side of Manchester. And these were not easy times that we're talking about. And they took their nickels and dimes and they built this hospital. Well, what happened after that was in 1974, at the urging of Bishop Primo, Notre Dame Hospital successfully merged with Sacred Heart Hospital and established Catholic Medical Center. And it was at that time that they set up as a volunteer corporation, a 501c3. Catholic Medical Center was established without a religious sponsor, but it was identified and defined as an agency, an official agency of the Roman Catholic Church, not under the sponsorship of the diocese at that time, but it was definitely an agency of the Roman Catholic Church. And when Monsignor Pierre Hevy died, he was so grateful to God for what had been accomplished that he actually asked to be buried on the property of his beloved Notre Dame de Lourdes. And my understanding is that he is buried there on the property. So I'm going to come back, I guess, and we're going to talk about future after. I'm going to stop at this juncture, right? Let's go on to.
Okay.
Come back.
Okay, thank you. Okay, do you mind if I sit just so I can sort my papers by top? Okay, thank you very much. I'm Patty Souza with New Hampshire Right to Life since 1973, and I was part of the group that was Save CMC the first time 20 years ago, and the second time 10 years ago. And we had to rely on the Attorney General understanding of the issues to save the Catholic Hospital. We're relying on the Attorney General, and one of the purposes of this forum is to acquaint you with some of the issues and to give you the address and the phone number of the Attorney General so you can help with this effort. So after the first time of trying to give away or sell Catholic Medical Center, the Attorney General, as Barbara said, had a special board, and the special board reported back to the Attorney General. And one of the written decisions the Catholic Medical Center Board gave, we think was a promise to the Attorney General, was, quote, any affiliate in the future must respect and share a commitment to the preservation of life from the moment of conception to the time of natural death. It goes on. So we thought 20 years ago, oh good, we don't have to be afraid. They've promised the Attorney General. Wrong. 10 years ago, the Attorney General listened. The Attorney General concluded that transaction, quote, will result in a profound change in the governance structure of the CMC charities, diminish the fiduciary duties of the board, inhibit the ability of the CMC charities to carry out their charitable missions. I said, thank you, Attorney General. You saved us again. Here we are again, 10 years later. So we went to the hearing when the letter of intent, 14 pages, I believe 14, came out. We went to the public hearing. We heard Dr. Pepe and the head of Dartmouth Dr. Conroy, is it? Give us the presentation. And we heard something that alarmed us a lot. No abortions will ever take place within the four walls of CMC. We said, wait a minute, four walls. Dartmouth Hitchcock is poised to come in, take over the whole southern tier of New Hampshire. They have a great presence in the northern tier. And they're going to take over the southern tier. And the practice of medicine is not going to be restricted to the four walls of Catholic Medical Center as we know it. It's going to be all over the southern tier. And if abortions are not going to take place in the four walls, they're going to take place all over the southern tier. And do babies really care if they're killed within the four walls of CMC or if they're killed someplace else? And do we care? We sure do. So we were very alarmed when we heard Dr. Pepe say this. And so then we decided we've got to get these documents. Well, we had the letter of intent. The public hearing was based on the 14-page letter of intent. The state requires hearings on whatever is going to happen. The 100-page definitive agreement, or now it's called the combination agreement, came out after the public hearings. So we had no opportunity to really raise the issues that were in the combination agreement. And further, there's something called a joint change of governance, which is an introduction to the combination agreement, which is another 80 pages. And as you heard Dr. Umbar, Attorney Umbar, say, it's a very, very complicated combination agreement, and the joint change of control agreement is very, very complicated. So we thought maybe if we give you a few examples of how the mission can be abrogated and how it will be abrogated with a few slides to back up what we're saying, it might be helpful. And Jason, if you could put up page from the joint change of control agreement, pages 21, 22, just to prove what I'm saying. By changing the control, and this document is aptly named joint change of control. CMC is losing control big time. But if you could put up those pages so I'll have backup of what I'm saying. But the new governance system is going to mandate that the mission will change. You'll see when the slides come up that there's going to be an overall system board, the system being all the entities and hospitals involved. The 3 hospitals that are now part of CMC and Dartmouth Hitchcock and all its affiliations. There's going to be a system board, and Dartmouth Hitchcock is going to control 6 of the 9 votes on the board. We are promised in the documents that Dr. Pepe will vote against any immoral procedure. But if you're 1 vote and Dartmouth is 6 out of 9, even though you're committed to vote against it, you know what the outcome is. If you could switch to page 24, and Jason will give you how to get all these things off the web, so that you don't, I'm just doing this so now you don't think I'm pulling them out of thin air. But on page 24 of the joint change of control, it says that the system, this is the new overarching system, has the right without limit to appoint members to the CMC boards, develop affiliations, and reorganizations. The 4 walls.
Kathy, where on the page would you?
24?
So yeah, this is page 24.
Okay. The 4 walls are getting smaller. On page 24 also, it talks about they can change programs, they can change academic affiliations without limit. Academic affiliations. Right now, we do have residents from Dartmouth Hitchcock studying at CMC to become doctors. Right now, they can learn everything they need to know in OBGYN except abortion. So where do they go? After they've done what they need to do to become OBGYNs, they go to an abortion clinic. We have a page from the abortion chamber in Concord stating they train the Dartmouth Hitchcock OBGYNs. So we may not be training them within our four walls, but we're enabling these people to go out and perform abortions. This isn't the evangelization that Barbara was just talking about. To me, this is a corruption of the evangelization, enabling people to do wrong. I said the government is going to enable the mission to be abrogated. And talking about the residents, Jason has two pictures that, if it's possible to put them up, I think will show in stark relief right and wrong as a story of the residents already, the Dartmouth Hitchcock residents. Last week at the State House, we had 4 bills related to abortion. And this was on January 22nd, the Roe versus Wade anniversary. And we had our people up there, some of you may have been there, testifying for life for the unborn. There was a row of mostly women in white jackets, Dartmouth Hitchcock on their jackets. There was a doctor.
This is from inside Reps Hall, and that's a zoom and enhance.
Okay, there was a Dr. Ellen Joyce, the picture was in the Union Leader, testifying. It didn't say where she was from. We knew, we Googled Dartmouth Hitchcock. Bob Dunn, the attorney for the diocese and a lobbyist, was there arranging Catholic testimony. So his Catholic testimony and his Dartmouth Hitchcock. Well, there was another picture in the Union Leader. Is that one of the students able to come up, Jason?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. These students from Trinity, a diocesan high school, wonderful school, are standing on the steps of the cathedral getting ready to take a bus to Washington for the March for Life. Are we being a little bit schizophrenic here? Are we paranoid? I don't think so. But I think if we allow this to keep happening, we're going to have no credibility when we go to the State House to testify. How can the bishop send someone up to testify on a bill when the people he's allowing to do the dirty work are testifying on the other side? So as a former rep, I feel really bad that the credibility that this church still has some in front of the legislature will be diminished. It will hurt our efforts to secure pro-life legislation. 2 days ago, Senator Regina Birdsell had a bill, and I don't have a picture of this, had a bill in Concord. And again, our people were up there testifying. It was the Baby Born Alive Protection Act, which says that if a baby miraculously survives an abortion, and sometimes it does, it should be cared for, not thrown aside to die. There was a doctor up there testifying against giving that baby any protection. Guess where that doctor was from? Dartmouth Hitchcock. So we're having a really bad time fighting this for the 3rd time, psychologically. And we are asking people to please, if you value Catholic medical, go to the trouble. Read the 100-page combination agreement. Read the joint change of control. Ask us, we have a lot of material. And just I don't want to take any more of your time. It's obvious what is going on here, but Jason, if you could go to the combination agreement with just 2 more quick pages, it shows some of the horrors that we're going to have. Page 10 of the combination agreement. Combination agreement, yeah. This is the legal document that Attorney Umbach referred to. The joint change of control is like an explanation of it. So now, in the combination agreement itself, on page 10, the system can never require CMC to engage in direct abortions, destruction of embryos, immoral research, parenthetically, immoral research. Who do you think did the clinical trials of RU-486 20 years ago? RU-486 being the abortion bill. You guessed it. Withholding of food and water, and if it becomes legal in New Hampshire, physician-assisted suicide. Why would they even be putting that in? And CMC will not, the provisions for CMC we just listed will not be imposed on other system members. That means all the other buildings, not the 4 walls. So we're enabling again, and I find it very chilling that they're even talking about physician-assisted suicide. We have a big job ahead of us, but I think with the grace of God we can do it. I thank you.
Karen, thank you. Colleen, you have a minute? Or 10?
I have a minute. Yes.
Please.
Hi. My name is Colleen McCormick Akey. I'm a nurse anesthetist, and as you said, I have a master's degree in bioethics. And I also have some experiences in how this plays out from Vermont, where I was on the faculty of the medical college and a clinical practitioner for 17 years. So, first of all, I want to say we are hearing a lot of words, combination, merger. Legally, this is an acquisition. If it were not an acquisition, it would not be in the Attorney General's office. So this, you can call, people put names on it, names that make it sound like it's something less than it is, but it is an acquisition of Catholic Medical Center by Dartmouth Hitchcock. That's the legal reality. And people have talked about the board, the distribution of the board. I just want to mention one thing before I forget. If you haven't had a chance to read the definitive agreement, the bishop, I can't even understand somebody signing a contract that says, if I or any of my successors, we have no recourse if you violate this contract. If we endeavor to rescind the contract, to get out of the contract, you have our permission to sue us. Who would you advise somebody to sign a contract that says you can sue me if you break the contract and I decide I don't want to be in the contract with you anymore? Would you advise a client to sign that? I can't even imagine, Plus, it hamstrings future bishops who may have a very different point of view. What happened in Vermont? In 1973, I was a licensed practical nurse. A merger had already begun. It was actually done kind of in a gradual way. There were 2 very major hospitals, tertiary care hospitals on the Hill in Burlington, Vermont. One was the Mary Fletcher Hospital, where I worked, and one was the Bishop de Gosbriand Hospital, where my roommate worked. And both hospitals were equivalent. They both had inpatient, outpatient, surgery, intensive care unit, you name it, they did it. They were staffed by both local physicians in private practice who now have been almost entirely driven out of the Burlington area, as well as physicians from the medical college. So their staffing was, in both places, they were really staffed by the same people. So they had a merger, and for several years, they both continued to practice independently of one another. A decision was made and negotiated that they were going to close down the ORs at Bishop de Gosbrian, turn it into a medical office building. They had a rehab center there, and they had outpatient x-ray and laboratory. So all the really truly hospital parts of the facility were no longer a hospital. There were no inpatient beds except for rehab or nursing home type beds. But there were no acute care beds. There was no longer any surgery, nothing. About the time that they did this, there was an agreement forged to the original agreement that nothing that violated Catholic teaching would ever happen on the campus of the University of Vermont Hospital, in that hospital. I went in the Navy. I was hospital corpsman. They put me through nursing school. I got out and I used a GI Bill to go to anesthesia training, graduate school, and I came back as a nurse anesthetist in 1987. So from my perspective, I'm looking at it, it's a secular facility, so I just assumed that they were doing abortions. So when I interviewed for the job, I told Dr. Mazuzan, the chairman of anesthesia, I was like, I don't do that, I won't have any part of it. He's like, that's no problem, not really a big problem. He said, most of that gets referred to Planned Parenthood, most of, okay? So, but I had to excuse myself, and like everything, it gradually changes. First it was like, no problem, we'll put those patients in other rooms. And then somebody would get transferred into my room, no problem, we'll switch somebody else in to do the case. And then it became, you have to find somebody to cover that case if you don't want to do it, over time. So just moving down the road, the slippery slope. I started my master's in bioethics in 2001, and I was embraced into the bioethics community by a Christian physician who had been hired from Loma Linda, California, Dr. Robert Orr, to chair the all the ethics activities at UVM. When I went and introduced myself and we began to work on, and I got invited onto clinical ethics committee, I was on the institutional ethics advisory committee, and I was also asked to teach some classes at the medical school. When all this happened, when we were first introduced, Bob Orr said to me, he was an evangelical, he said, the reason I took this job is because they don't do abortions here. From the clinical side, that was what he was told. I, from the clinical side, knew that we did do abortions there because I had to be excused from elective abortions. And not only did we do elective abortions in the OR in the first trimester, up on labor and delivery, they asked us to put in and manage epidurals for late-term abortions in the labor and delivery suite so the women would not be uncomfortable during their late-term procedure, because obviously a bigger baby is harder to labor and deliver, and the technique creates a lot of cramping and is a very uncomfortable technique. So they were doing abortions in the OR, they were doing abortions on labor and delivery. They had an in vitro fertilization program where they would sometimes implant up to 15 fertilized eggs, knowing that they have a very low chance of all of them surviving. But if more than twins survive, it was a contractual part of the agreement, because I had a friend who was a nurse who had in vitro, that you would allow them to selectively reduce all but 2 babies. She carried triplets. And they said to her, which one? They came to her and said, which one do you want us to eliminate? And she said, I've been trying for 15 years to get pregnant. You're not eliminating anybody. And they said, you signed a contract. She persevered though, and she did have her triplets. But again, with the in vitro fertilization, there is a selective, they do implant a large number, knowing that most of them won't survive. And then if many do survive, then they go to the mother, and it's contractual that she will have some of them eliminated to make, because it keeps their statistics looking good. Okay, so they have more healthy babies and more healthy mommies. So just a few years later than that, they decided they wanted to acquire the Fanny Allen Hospital, which is in Essex Junction, Winooski area. It's a little more peripheral, but in Burlington, those were really the three hospitals. It was also a Catholic hospital run by the Sister Hospitaliers of St. Joseph out of Montreal, as was the first one. Whoops. Oops. So they were acquired. The sister who was the CEO was tasked with monitoring what was going on at the big hospital. And so it turns out that I found out later, I was in a lecture hall, and the physician who was lecturing was saying how he was lamenting how they couldn't do abortions anywhere on UVM campus because of the relationship with the Catholic facilities. And I corrected him on that, and he said, well, it has to go under review. The case has to go under review. And I had been in an OR one day where a patient was brought up from the ER to the OR shortly after she was seen in the ER for an elective termination. And I heard the whole discussion between the physician and the resident. They put her on right after the patient that I was taking care of in another room. And so I said, I've seen him come from the ER. I said, there was no time for review. And he looked down at his paper and he said to me, kind of embarrassedly, the review's done posthumously. After the doctor terminates, they review it and say that it was proper. And then they submit their report how the termination was proper to the Catholic authorities for review. So when I went to the sister about the whole thing, she was very interested. Bishop Angel, I actually, I wrote letters to the head of the medical school because I was teaching there, and these discussions were going on in the classroom. I copied to the chairman of my department, copied to the OB/GYN anesthesiologist who was a specialty, and Bishop Angel, who was a bishop at the time, Sister Ducheneau. Sister Ducheneau was very interested. She said, I thought the numbers had been going up, and I was sort of wondering about that. Shortly thereafter, University of Vermont announced that they were thinking that maybe they would just close the operating rooms at the Fanny Allen Hospital. They probably didn't need them anymore. And all of a sudden, Sister Irene lost all interest in investigating this. And the bishop, he and she had a talk, and they asked me, and I never at the time went public with any of this. I did it all very, everybody got a confidential letter about it when I tried to bring up the fact that on paper and in interviewing ethicists for positions, they're saying we don't do it, and they're teaching in the medical school we don't do it, although sooner or later somebody must realize when they get into their clinicals that they do it, that all the while they were doing elective abortions. So this is 2019, so this is how far we've come. The Office of Civil Rights of the Health and Human Services Department of the United States government issues a notice of violation to the University of Vermont Medical Center after it unlawfully forced a nurse to assist in an abortion. So we've gone from we don't do that here to you will assist or you will lose your job. And when they collected evidence, she was not the only one who had been coerced at the risk of loss of her job. So they started that investigation in August of 2019, or they released their report. But in November of 2019, a federal judge halted the Trump administration conscience protection rule. So where it will go, there are a number of people. There are people in the state of New Hampshire who have conscience protection suits filed with HHS against Dartmouth Hitchcock. Whether they will ever see the light of day, I don't know. But what this points to is we are in a culture war. We have been in a culture war for decades, and we foolishly try to pretend that we're not in a culture war. But it is ubiquitous. I mean, you know, watch the nightly news. You know, watch what happens in Washington. Watch, HHS tries to protect somebody's conscience, And then a federal judge says, no, you can't protect their conscience rights. And where it will go, nobody knows. Who's going to be elected next? Who's going to be elected after that? Where would we even be having this discussion if it weren't, if Trump hadn't been elected? Because conscience rights would have already been abrogated, right? Would have already been snatched. So we have to understand, John Paul II said it in the 1990s, there is a culture of death, a pervasive culture of death. And we are supposed to be the culture of life. And the culture of death is most highly represented in healthcare. Where else? Where do people go to live and die? They go to the hospital or the hospice organization. And I could tell you stories about Dartmouth Hitchcock's hospice organization, but we don't have time. But we're in a battle. There's a culture of life and a culture of death. If we allow the Catholic Medical Center to go any farther down the road, and it is already in violation of a lot of moral teaching of the Catholic Church, but if we allow them to continue down this road, if we allow Dartmouth Hitchcock to acquire them, then at some point in time, we're going to wonder, I will wonder, where do I go to work where I can do my job without being forced to participate in something I have a moral objection to? And people will be wondering, where do I go to get care if I'm seriously ill without somebody wanting to pull my feeding tube because I'm not healing fast enough, right? So people will not know where to go. The child in Texas, right, 11-month-old child, and the courts agree with the doctors go to court. Of course, they look, and the parents are probably fairly hysterical. They want their child to have a chance to survive, and the doctors are very businesslike and academic, and they make a very good show, and they say, but look, who's the girl in Boston? They took her from her parents for over a year, and she went back far worse condition than she had left. Justina Pelletier. The doctors went to court. The doctors went to court and got custody of that girl. She was actually assaulted in the care of the state, and she went from walking, skating, socially interactive to being wheelchair bound in the year that she was with the state of Massachusetts. So you have to understand that the thing about Catholic healthcare, and this was brought out very, very well, is Jesus sent the disciples forth to heal and to preach and evangelize. And it was never about being corporate capitalist organization, paying people, everybody with an O after their name makes 200 times the salary of an average employee. That's not the Catholic image, that's not the Christian image. Catholic healthcare was to a mission and a ministry to people. And just like going to church on Sunday, nobody charges admission at the door. Those who have contribute generously, those who have not give what they can, or if they can't, they don't. But and it's not being charitable because you get government money for taking care of people instead of being charitable. That's not charity. It's okay, well, we'll take care of you because the government will give us money. Charity is, we will take care of you no matter what. And we will know that that in the big picture, because of who we are as a church, as a people, everybody who needs care will get the care they need, and we'll all pitch in to see to it that people are cared for. So that's the pro-life position.
Colleen, thank you. Very effective. Give me 3 minutes.
Are we going back to Barbara?
First, I want to talk. This is not complicated. And I think you know it. As Colleen said, there's a culture of life in our society and a culture of death. CMC has stood for and stands for and declares itself to be standing for the culture of life. But there is a large movement now to take that away by a secular institution that does and supports abortion. It's just that simple. As Attorney Gray explained, a Catholic hospital has a trust with the public who has donated money to them, that have supported that organization, that it will stand by the pro-life position. They cannot stand by the pro-life position in any meaningful way if they have combined, taken over by, choose your words, an organization that is far larger than they are, that will control the board by majority under contract, that will control the budget, and say, well, we'll give the veto to the bishop. Where does that get us? Where does it get the pro-life culture? It gets it nowhere. It's one more step in the culture of death, encroaching onto the culture of life. It is within that document. Read the 100 pages, read the other agreement that shows this, but it's buried in the legalism of control and board and budgets and who votes on the board, who nominates the board that gets votes on, what's the majority position of that board. It's all there. This is not complicated. Dartmouth is represented by those, 5 women, or men and women, with the white coats that oppose care for a baby that is born alive. That's the organization that wants to combine. Control is a better word. CMC. CMC knows it. Dartmouth knows it. It is an absolute violation of the fiduciary duty of this board of CMC to protect why they were created, to protect the purposes for which money is committed to. Even if you're pro-abortion, you ought to oppose that merger out of respect for the culture of life that has funded this organization to preserve the culture of life. That's not happening here. This is the 3rd time this has been tried. How many times do you get to retry a case until you get the right result? And then it's undoable. 3rd time. White coats up there. Don't give that child care if it's accidentally born alive. Does a Catholic medical hospital really want to merge with an organization that takes that position? Because they got a couple paragraphs in an agreement that says, well, the bishop could veto. Are they willing to merge with an organization that could do their abortions across the hallway or in the next building down the road because they combined with CMC? That's what's happening here. CMC is not articulating that correctly. The bishop is not articulating that correctly. That's easy for me to say. I'm not Catholic. That's what's happening here, folks. All the history, well said by this group, all the encroaching culture of death that is trying to push back the culture of life. This is one dramatic step for that in New Hampshire, if we let it happen. So who can stop it? The Attorney General, Charitable Division, can say no for the 3rd time, should they choose to do it. Put yourself in the position of the Charitable Trust. They have 120 days to figure out all these documents and sort out all of this legal complexity to see the truth of this. If they don't hear from us, they being the charitable division of the Attorney General's office, it may be hard, perhaps, for them to sort this out. 3rd time. Are we going to see a 4th time? If this is a 5th time? It's the creeping culture of death that is supported by this society. You know as well as I do that we have a Democratic Party where everybody on that dais supports abortion on demand. Roe v. Wade, 40 years ago? A little more? Said, yes, abortion can be made legal 1st trimester. But by other case law, Supreme Court case law, it's now potentially on demand. It is on demand in our culture. Dartmouth is an abortion provider. Dartmouth does not deny that. CMC is created and has promised its donors and promised its supporters they would be a culture of life. How dare they? How dare they say, well, we're combining. The bishop's got a veto on some of this, so don't worry about it. That's what we're here. Thank you. Who wanted to speak again? Or do we take questions?
I think we should take some questions, yes.
Let's take questions. Questions, comments, criticisms? Ma'am.
Okay, that's a lot. I'd love to know the websites and everything so I can look at those documents.
Can you put that up?
But I want, what's the bishop getting from this? Why are they doing this? Is it money?
Does anybody know on this dais? Does anybody know?
There's gotta be money involved.
Not speculation. Does anybody
So
know
we
why
can
CMC
speculate.
supports it? Jason?
So Mr. Umba and I met with CMC a few months ago, and an interesting dynamic. I can't speak to what's going on in their hearts, but an interesting dynamic is that we were talking about life, and they kept talking about money, and so money, prestige about being associated with an academic provider. Upton Sinclair has this amazing quote. He says, what is it? It's hard to, I wrote it down actually because I loved it so much. It's difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it. And so we were talking about the pro-life mission, how in their values they have respect for the unborn, and what they talked about was more money. And I think, and Dartmouth certainly stands to make a lot of money by acquiring CMC.
Dartmouth stands to make money?
Oh yeah, tons.
But what about, why would we sell out our Catholic hospital if we're not?
So if you read the agreement, the 001 joint agreement where they explain their arguments, the first argument they make is that Dartmouth Hitchcock is in an existential crisis because of the southern tier, which is where most of the population in New Hampshire is, going towards Boston instead of going north to Dartmouth. And so that's the one they lead with. And so what they're saying is that Dartmouth has a problem. Well, when these two smaller hospitals, Huggins and Monadnock, needed to find a partner, CMC determined that in order for them to join forces, that those two smaller hospitals had to agree to continue their practice of not giving up, of not doing abortion and a couple of other procedures that would be very, very much against Catholic beliefs. And so we think that if Dartmouth really needs CMC, then why are they any different? Why are they more special than these other smaller hospitals?
Let me add to that. If Dartmouth really wants to do this acquisition, let's use the term the way it really is. Jason and I commented in our meeting with the CMC personnel, why don't you ask Dartmouth to give up their abortion position? That can't be a significant revenue source for them. And then it might clear the way, clear the opposition. They're not going to do abortion. There was no answer to that. They could not answer to that. I don't think the proposal, as far as I know, has ever been made to Dartmouth. We'll do it, abortion or not, is CMC's position. And they won't deny that. They won't deny. They'll say the bishop's got a veto. Does the bishop have control of the budget? Yes, I'm sorry.
We asked the three ladies here, met with Dr. Pepe and other people from CMC, and we did ask that question that Patrice just
The
asked.
question being?
Money. Is CMC in trouble? Because we had read in the newspaper just recently how Dartmouth had lost 12 million the year previous, and how CMC is in the black on all these millions. And Dr. Pepe actually told us that CMC was not in any danger in the near future, but it was decades down that they were afraid of. And we said, well, why don't you trust God for decades down? And then we also asked the question which related to what Patrice said, because if they're not in dire straits right now and they're worried about decades, well, a lot can happen in decades. But he also said that they had explored joining other hospitals. One was not suitable, and one was suitable, but the other hospital wanted a contribution of several million. Do you remember?
Million.
I don't know, it was 3 or 5
3
million.
or 5, I'm not.
They wanted, and Dr. Pepe didn't see why, CMC being the larger, more prestigious, should kick in a few million. And we said, well, we'd rather see it lose a few million than lose lots. But anyway, money is.
So CMC should be bargaining from a position of strength.
Correct.
Then why is Dartmouth taking over the struggle, and why isn't CMC taking over Dartmouth?
I think it's speculation.
I
more than
can,
else.
well, I can tell you about the position, the last time that this was endeavored, Ovid Lamontagne and I had a little back and forth.
Who was that?
He was the lawyer at the time representing CMC. And he said, Dartmouth Hitchcock wanted to control the budget. He said, but I said, no, we're not going to do it from the top down. We'll do it from the bottom up. We'll propose the budget. They'll get a couple of chances and then if we can't come to an agreement, it'll go to binding arbitration. And I said, there's the problem of it. You look at Dartmouth Hitchcock as the top and CMC as the bottom. You should be looking at CMC at the top and Dartmouth Hitchcock as the bottom.
Thank you. That makes sense.
Other
I'd like to
questions?
let you
Other
know.
questions? Other comments?
I have something I would like to
Please,
please.
Barbara.
Earlier, it was brought up, former Representative Souza was talking about how in these agreements, they're talking about being able to do physician-assisted suicide and some of these other procedures. And in our research, in the state of Vermont right now, they have Act 39, which is a form of physician-assisted suicide, in that the doctor writes a prescription. There's certain guidelines. The person has to be terminally ill, blah, 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 blah. But basically, what happens is you come to the doctor, they go through the protocol, the doctor writes the prescription and hands it to the patient. The patient has to be able to take the prescription himself. But there have been a number of deaths that have happened in Vermont because of this. And the name of the organization that pulled this all together is Patient Choices in Vermont, Act 39. If you Google Act 39, it'll connect you with the various information. The Dartmouth doctors are licensed to write these prescriptions. And there is absolutely no liability, no sniff of physician-assisted suicide attributed to this legislation in Vermont, which allows this to happen. The other thing I want to let you know is we talk a lot about Planned Parenthood, and as you know, many pro-life individuals from all over New Hampshire visit the abortion chambers on a regular basis to pray and to try to change the minds of those who are going to terminate their pregnancies and kill their babies. The doctor that does the abortions at the Planned Parenthood clinic that's just up a ways here on Pennacook Street is a very prominent Dartmouth doctor. And she teaches at the medical school in Lebanon on the campus. She has written many articles very strong in support of abortion. It bothers me greatly that we are embracing an academic medical center that is so steeped in the culture of death and that actually does abortions here in Manchester, where here we are following Pope John Paul II and Humanae Vitae and all of the things that we're supposed to be doing, trying to do the culture of life. So I just wanted to also add that to the layer of why this is crazy. This is insane, and it's insulting to try and tell the citizens in the Diocese of Manchester that we're all going to be just fine. Thank you.
Charlotte?
Can I come a little closer to
Sure,
the
come right up
microphone
here.
just so that this gets picked up? Because this is a comment as well as a question, I guess, for the panel. So, I wear many hats. I'm on the board for New Hampshire Right to Life. I'm one vote. I am a concerned mom, a pro-life activist of sorts, and I go a lot to try and speak at the State House. I was there last Wednesday when Dartmouth showed up and took up the row. And I was very disturbed by the fact that although one of the doctors who spoke was speaking on behalf of New Hampshire ACOG, the American College for Gynecology and Obstetrics, and one of them was apparently speaking merely as a medical professional, a neonatologist, not even an OBGYN, but a neonatologist speaking on behalf of herself. Now, see, when I went to Catholic school, I was taught that when I wore the uniform, I was representing my school, and that if I represented poorly, that my school would be held accountable. They showed up in uniform, and I took real exception to that. Not only because one of my parishioners was forced to leave her job, her career at Dartmouth, because she advocated against, starving a patient to death. Recently, this is very recent and it's in the news, she was present at one of the hearings that the diocese held. And not only because of my own story, which I was there to testify about the fact that Dartmouth decided that they were going to tell me that my second son had 2 markers for Down syndrome in the mail. They told me with a form that just had a diagnosis code and the words fetal anomaly in big bold print in all capital letters, with no cover letter of explanation. And when I called them up to ask them what this was about based on the ultrasound I had just taken, they said, well, let us refer you to our genetics people who can talk to you about your options. And of course, one of those was abortion. This is how you're treated in the Dartmouth medical system. And the bottom line, I feel, is that this is about sanctuary. Sanctuary for the women of New Hampshire, and for people who are on death's door who maybe don't want to be pushed along because somebody needs a bed. This is about sanctuary for those people. And I went there and I testified on Wednesday for all 4 of the bills as best I could, being just a plebe. Instead of listening to me, I sat there as each one of my testimonies was blithely dismissed by the Judiciary Committee because medical professionals behind me were telling us things like, wait, let me get the actual quote, because it's actually written up in Ellen Kolb's Leaven for the Loaf. This whole thing was so disturbing, I'm telling you. Dr. Ellen Rice first gets up and she testifies to the fact that she's unaware if there are any regulations or any medical standards in place for children who survive abortions. Now, this came after a question from the chairwoman. This is a leading gynecologist from Dartmouth Hitchcock saying, yeah, if a baby is wanted, that means that, you know, we have standards in place and they're going to receive care. She acknowledged as much. But if it starts out as an abortion, she is unaware of what the medical standards are for that child. She admitted that in public. It's part of public record. Anybody hearing her could, you know, and then her colleague gets up, the neonatologist, and says, these things just don't happen in New Hampshire. These babies don't get born alive. And I'm thinking to myself, she's a neonatologist. Surely this isn't going to fly, right? Instead, what happens is Mr. Walter Stapleton gets up. He's a grand knight. He has served our whole state very, very well in his capacity as a representative. And he starts to talk about some of the things that are happening. You know, maybe not necessarily pinpointing New Hampshire hospitals, but saying that they're happening. And he's cut off. Chairwoman Smith, again, says, oh, I'm sorry, we've had medical testimony that this doesn't happen. She's wearing a white coat. And because she's from Dartmouth, and Dartmouth holds such sway over our state, her medical testimony was allowed to stand for every single hospital in all of New Hampshire. He was denied the right to speak the rest of his testimony because he had stepped out of the room and she was making him aware that medical testimony had already been received. This was the most astonishing, egregious situation I have ever seen in our state house, and it concerned me greatly because as I went to speak to Representative Dunn from our diocese about my concerns with Dartmouth Hitchcock and all of the things that they testified, he cited some very key points, which I find very illuminating. He said, this has been backed by the National Catholic Bioethics Center and the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. Now, I have looked at I've looked at the NCBC, what we are allowed to see of the NCBC's moral agreement or analysis of this situation. And they cite the Congregation for the Faith and the USCCB's 6th edition on how ethical and religious directives are to be handled. Okay. In my opinion, and maybe it doesn't count for much, being a theology teacher for as many years as I have been, but in my opinion, anyone reading those documents would be able to discern under these circumstances, and especially in light of what happened last Wednesday at the State House, that they're in violation of both. And I can point to the articles, okay? So in the USCCB 6th edition, numbers 73, 74, and 75, I find them highly instructive, and I plan to write to NCBC and Father Tad about those issues, and the bishop.
Isn't it interesting that the report from NCBC, what does that stand for, Jason? Do you remember?
The National Catholic Bioethics Center.
This is an organization that voices opinion on whether a particular transaction is consistent with Catholic doctrine. Ethical. Their report, the CMC, was summarized but is alleged to be private, so the public can't see it. Why? Why in the world, if it's favorable to CMC's position that this acquisition should occur, wouldn't they release the whole document? Excuse me.
So that's, I mean, so if you look at 73, 74, and I'm just trying to get them up without my mouse here, so it's really complicated, but I wish I could show it to you on the screen because I have them all here, and I don't know that if you have plugs that would do it, but so 73, 74, and 75 basically.
This is a what?
From from the USCCB's 6th edition of the ethical and religious directives. Okay. So when you look at these, I'm sorry, technical difficulties. When you look at these issues, the way that it's written up. All right. So actually, let me back up. Let me do this first because it's in front of me. So the National Catholic Bioethics Center says that CMC is not directly supporting, and I think directly would be a pretty key word because we really shouldn't be supporting it indirectly either, but not directly supporting by governance, management, funding, ownership, or referral relationships any practices contrary to the Catholic moral teaching at other entities. Okay, yes they are on all counts. Governance, by allowing Huggins and Monadnock to stop following ERDs. Okay, that's in trench warfare. You don't give up the men on the front lines. These people agreed to our ERDs, and now we're going back on that agreement with them. And they may just, and what I is so baffling to me.
Articulate that to the crowd. Who
So-
are those two hospitals and what are they giving up and how?
So Huggins and Monadnock were acquired by CMC under Granite One, or they affiliated with CMC.
Under a new
I believe-
organization called Granted One.
I believe because it was in their financial interests to do so, and because CMC perceived itself to be in a position of power, which they still are with DHH, because they perceived themselves to be in a position of power, they were able to use the ERDs as a bargaining chip. They said basically, if you want to affiliate, then come on in, but you need to check whatever immoral practices you're doing at the front door. And so by
And they agree.
affiliating-
They agree.
by affiliating now with Dartmouth Hitchcock, Dartmouth Hitchcock gets 9 votes out of 15, okay? 9 votes out of 15, and the 6 votes, what's confusing to me is that the NCBC says that 6 of those votes are actually sitting CMC members. Now, I've heard it from different people that actually Huggins and Monadnock have a place at the table as part of Granite One. CMC will only have 3 of those 6 votes. That's a huge step down, which it wasn't even a majority to begin with, but now it's Dartmouth is going to run the whole show. So they get to establish the governance, which we've already heard, can be overturned and changed in a matter of years. Then we have Huggins and Monadnock, who will now return to being secular
Immediate.
because
Immediate.
they can choose to be as members of the board. See, now we don't care about anybody outside of our 4 walls anymore, right? So, and then you have management and ownership by relinquishing control. Okay, so they say it's not directly supporting management and ownership of any practices contrary to Catholic moral teaching at other entities. That's the NCBC's thing. So, but management and ownership are being relinquished by losing control of being able to determine their own future. Then funding. Okay, so this is baffling to me too. Okay, when we pay.
Can I interrupt you for one
yeah.
second? So I'm just going to draw attention. So this is the combination agreement. And actually, so what Charlotte is talking about here, let's see.
No, that's the ethical and you have the ethical and religious directives.
So this is the combination agreement.
Right.
So what this is saying here, the highlighted part, the parties further agree that after the nominees to the system board, which controls the budgets, the strategic plans, and other things, serve their initial terms and their guaranteed successive terms, so they get 1 re-up for 3 years, I think it is. The system board will be self-perpetuating and will elect and re-elect all of its non-ex officio trustees by a simple majority vote. So what this means is that there is no such thing, in the long term, there is no such thing as a CMC appointee or a Dartmouth appointee. What happens is that after the initial terms and those subsequent terms, it is self-appointing, which means that, if Dartmouth likes Dartmouth people and they control the majority, they will, you can easily foresee that they would just keep appointing more Dartmouth people for all the slots. I mean, they might extend an olive branch and have one or two other ones, but they don't have to.
Right.
So in essence, the Catholic identity on the system board is not there in the long term.
Plus, it says they can dismiss anybody without cause from the board.
I think from the
Yeah,
individual
yeah,
CMC trustees. And
Yeah,
things
Dartmouth
like that,
Hitchcock
yeah.
can dismiss.
I have a question. Were you reading from the highlights?
So
Was
I'm
that-
reading from the highlights
Okay.
that the National Catholic Bioethics Center puts out, which I think honestly gives us ammunition enough.
Well, the
So-
one sentence on those 2 pages that smacked me in the nose was the new system or the new entity will be secular.
Yes, I agree.
That sentence is in
Yep.
the highlights.
Mhm.
So,
And they don't even have their name. It'll be Dartmouth Hitchcock Granite 1. That's it. There's no more CMC at all.
Go to number 70 on the ERDs. Number 70 speaks to the new entity.
The areas.
Catholic healthcare organizations are not permitted to engage in immediate material cooperation in actions that are intrinsically immoral, such as abortion, euthanasia, assisted suicide, and direct
No,
sterilization.
there's another one that says no entities may be formed. What number was it? We're trying to find it the other day.
73 through 75 were the ones that I was speaking
There's
to.
another one in that group. Go up to 65 and see. There's one about you cannot form any entity. No.
It's probably in here because this is about collaborative things.
Yeah, it's about, it says
Yeah.
no entity may be formed. It's,
All right, let me
It's in
interrupt.
there.
We have
Can I-
5 more
can I-
minutes.
we have 5.
Can I just say-
Can
I just say
5 minutes
one more
before
thing?
we gotta adjourn?
I know. I'll make it quick. So the last couple of things were that they said we're not directly supporting with our funding. Now, you know, to me, this is kind of the same thing with Title X and how this pays in to keep the lights on in Planned Parenthood. In my opinion, and I think any donor in their right mind would see it the same way, if we're giving Dartmouth Hitchcock the southern tier of New Hampshire, and we're giving them real estate across the road and via a little footbridge to CMC, we are financially culpable in participating in helping them keep the lights on.
we're in
And they're doing abortions. They're starving people to death. They're doing gender transitioning. They're doing so many different things. IVF, tossing babies in the garbage, or experimenting on them. The genetics community up there is no joke. It is all about eugenics. And then the final thing is that they say that the referral of relationships won't happen. Well, this doesn't make sense to me at all. We already have a situation where we have Dartmouth Hitchcock employees who serve as doctors at CMC. We have anecdotal evidence from people who have come forward to say that all they have to do is say, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, come to my other office and I'll give you the procedures that you want. How is this ever going to spell anything other than scandal for our church, and now the diocese, and the NCBC, and the Congregation for the Faith,
And the mission.
and the mission, and the people of New Hampshire, whose souls and very lives depend on this information getting out to as many people as quickly as possible?
And how does it not violate the fiduciary
Thank
duties
you.
of the board of CMC to allow that to happen? As Philip Gray explained, the board has fiduciary high obligations to the people that have donated and the pro-life community that founded that church for that mission statement.
So if I could just make a comment on so something that Charlotte talked about on the pro-life side is that so right now CMC is the first among equals in Granite 1, so they have a controlling stake. Huggins and Monadnock, the two smaller hospitals that are part of Granite 1, currently agree in the Granite One agreement not to take up certain practices, quote unquote, out of respect for CMC's core values, of which one of those is abortion. Under this new agreement, they'll lose those protections. And so I actually, I'm
Who will lose what protection?
so Huygens and Monadnock will lose the protections from their commitment not to continue not to start doing
Their
abortion.
commitment goes away, is what you're saying.
Yeah, and it's not that they were doing them before and gave them up. It says that they will continue their practice, their current practices of not performing the following procedures. So, this combination or takeover actually emboldens the abortion industry here in New Hampshire, because Dartmouth will control the procedures at those hospitals and can just tell them you're going to start doing abortion whether you want to or not. CMC taking this action actually is against their own mission. Their act of putting Monadnock and Huygens under Dartmouth without any protections is against their mission, their pro-life mission. It will also give a lot of money, tons of money, to Dartmouth, an abortion provider, and will make them much more financially viable for the indefinite future.
All right, we've got just a few minutes, but I think it's only fair. We have representatives of Dartmouth here. Would they like to address any of these comments that they think are inaccurate or unfair?
Yeah, I'm from Catholic Medical Center. I'm just here to listen. We've been engaged for a while, and
Do you have anything to say to the public with the camera, the live video, on behalf of CMC about any of these criticisms?
nope.
Okay. How about the two gentlemen behind you? You represent CMC, correct?
I represent Dartmouth Hitchcock.
Doc, do you have any comments or criticisms or things that you believe are inaccurate to what's been stated?
Just here to observe. Thank you.
No comment then? Sir,
Yeah.
you represent whom?
Well, I've worked in diocesan administration.
I'm sorry?
I work in diocesan administration.
In the diocese
For the
administration.
Diocese of Manchester.
Thank you.
Nice.
You can tell I'm Protestant. I can't pronounce it.
No, that's all right.
Yeah. Do you have any comments or questions or thoughts on this?
No, thank you.
All right. Thank you, all three. We've got just 5 minutes,
2 minutes.
2 minutes. We promised the library we'd be out of here at 8 o'clock. Last 2 minutes, who wants? In the audience.
Any other questions?
In
Yeah,
the
other
audience.
questions? Yes, please.
Yes, sir.
I have only a question. How can we get the bishop here and the canon lawyer for the diocese to explain to us why the things that they're calling secret have to be that way? How can we get them to come?
Well, hold on, he's asking CMC or Dartmouth, sir. Does anybody that is a part of CMC or Dartmouth have any explanation for the items that are not fully revealed in the disclosures to the public, such as the full ethical report? Can anybody explain why it's only summarized and not fully provided?
The full moral opinion is a confidential document.
Why?
It has been.
Why?
It always
Why?
has been. The summary that was provided to give you a summary of what's in there.
Why would not the whole document be provided? That's the question.
It's a document between CMC, the bishop.
In other words, they chose to
diocese,
keep it private. That's all you're saying.
the NCBC as well as a company. It's
Did the
bound by
di-
confidential agreement.
Did the diocese pay for that? I mean, the NCCB is not a Catholic, it's not an agent of the church, it's an independent group of ethicists, I guess. It's an independent group, and I think they're paid, right? So it would be.
Again,
They
the
are.
summary was provided to provide the public, to have the transparency, to provide the basis of the moral opinion.
So, sir, that's as good an answer as you're going to get, because they chose to keep it private. Is that a fair summary? Because
During the 2010,
Sorry, hold on.
during the 2010 review, the situation was the same. And I did the same thing then that I've done now. I asked to have a conversation with the bishop, and he refused. And he has refused now. And I have asked for a full understanding of the canonical opinion as well as the medical and ethical and moral opinion, and that was never provided. So you would have to really ask the bishop and CMC why they want to withhold those elements that are really intrinsic to the social contract that they have with the patrons and donors.
Charlotte, last word, Charlotte.
The last thing I would say is, if Bishop Labashi is listening or watching tonight, I greatly implore you, as a Catholic here in New Hampshire, to make yourself more accessible than people at the State House. We need to be able, women in New Hampshire seeking sanctuary, need to be able to tell you the stories that pour out of Dartmouth Hitchcock every single day to people like me who they think can represent them through New Hampshire Right to Life. We are begging you to listen to your people, to turn to them, to ask them for help in paying for whatever it is that CMC needs. Do a pledge drive. Come to our churches. Tell us, do an annual collection. Where is the understanding that this church is based on its sheep? Turn to your sheep. You're the shepherd. Hear our story. Make this stop. You have a chance to make it stop right now.
With that, we'll close the meeting. Thank you for being here, folks.
Well, so before we exit, we have information on how to contact the New Hampshire Attorney General's office. I also have a handout I'm happy to give you. You don't have to write everything down. I'll give you a handout, but go to NHRTL.org. It's right there on the front page. Just click on the merger info. So just go to New Hampshire Right to Life, so NHRTL.org, and then right on there, there's this page that you're welcome to look at. This has the information. Please make your opinion known. You know, CMC was founded as a charity, and it wasn't founded about money. It was founded by nuns and who were willing to give up their lives to serve the poor. So we think that making this decision about money is going in the wrong direction, and we want to call them back to returning to their roots.
Thank you, Jason. With that, folks, again, thank you for being here. Feel free to contact any of us at any time.
Yep.
We should put this table back.